Hi guys, I think we're live. I'm going to try to see if I can see all these comments out there. Hi, I'm Ajaire Parello. Today we're going to be making the Let Freedom Ring kit. So it's one of the Shannon fabrics. Really great kits. I'll pull up some pictures of what it looks like in a minute, but we'll just wait just a minute or two for everybody to join us. We're going to be making this on the regular sewing machine today. And in a couple weeks, one of our other Cuddle ambassadors is going to be making it on the long arm. So I know a lot of you have been asking about making those strip quilts on a long arm. And so we're super excited that Christina's going to join us to help with that. But today we're first just going to make it on regular machine and go through all of the steps of what you'll do from opening the package to, how you're going to complete it. So we're going to actually sew today live. You'll often see me on Cuddle Conversations with Sheila Ryan. And on those, there's not really any live sewing generally. We're just chatting and answering all your questions. So it's fun to actually be able to get to sew live today. And Sheila's actually with me today in the background. She is going to be sort of our voice in the sky because I'm going to be sewing, which is back there. And when I have my sewing machine view up for you guys to see what I'm doing back there, I might not see your comments. So she's just going to help me out with anytime you guys have a question that sounds like something everybody else would like to hear, she'll shout out to me and I'll answer her back. So you may hear Sheila's voice occasionally today. So, yep, I'm seeing Colorado. I'm here in Maryland, Traverse City, Michigan. We're going to Michigan in a few weeks. Not quite that far north, but almost. Kansas, Arizona. We've got like perfect weather this week. I mean, warm, but with a touch of coolness in the air. Not that terrible humidity we were having last week, which is normal for us here in Maryland, but still not welcome. So this week has been much, much better. Hopefully you guys are not sweltering where you guys are. So we are going to get started. This is going to, there's a lot to do with this. And so I don't want to drag us on and on and on. So if you have questions, Jackie Hillman, one of our other Cuddle ambassadors, as always, is out on the YouTube stream. So she can answer comments in there. Some of our other Cuddle ambassadors, I'm sure, are out on the Facebook feed. But ask your questions. If some reason I miss it or Sheila doesn't catch it or something, we can always answer them after the live. So definitely feel free to ask your questions. And if you're a long armor, save those questions for when Christina comes in a couple weeks to do those. But feel free to ask them. Feel free to ask them in the thread, and that'll give her something to answer right when she gets here. So to start with, let me just show you a picture really quick of what this is going to look like when we're done. So it's called Let Freedom Ring, and this is it says borderline here, but underneath it does say Let Freedom Ring. It just can't see it because it says Welcome to Sew Together Live there. So that's the kit. It's big. It's one of our bigger strip quilt kits. And so we'll get into how we're going to handle the width and the heft of it. That'll kind of be part of what we do. So it comes in a little packet. Mine has plastic around it. So I'm just going to take the plastic off. Sorry, it's probably an annoying sound. So let me take the plastic off and get rid of that so we don't have to listen to that noise anymore. So I'm going to show you my overhead view. The overhead doesn't super love some of these colors. So if it doesn't adjust as well as we'd like it to, I apologize in advance. So that's the bottom. There's a pretty little ribbon on top with the Let Freedom Ring little flag thing there. Let's see. So we just undo this. I just wanted to show you like from opening it, what's in here. So this is going to finish. It says approximately 41 by 59, which is pretty big. The width of most of these cuddles is 60 inches, 58 to 60 inches. So 59 inches is pretty much the width of the cuddle. So it's going to be, pretty wide. Often with the bigger strip quilt kits, it doesn't come with a backing, but this one does have a backing, which is great. So backing is included. I like to save my grosgrain ribbon for something for later. So in this stack, that's there. Got all our different fabrics there, and we'll talk about each one. It comes with the pattern. So nicely printed pattern. And inside there, there's also a Cuddle Basics sheet, which just gives you the general basics. Plus it gives you some QR codes to some links, which can help you with anything if you haven't done stuff with Cuddle before. So in here, it does tell us exactly with each of the fabrics what we need of each, because these are cut pieces, but they're not always cut exactly to the size we need. With the strip quilts, we're often having to kind of do some strips and actually cut them out of these pieces that have been pre-cut for us. So there is some work to do to prep before we can actually get to the sewing. So let's jump to that now. This first stars panel, it's called, I'm just going to look at the instructions so I make sure I've got all of these names correct. This is called just the Cuddle Star panel. And I'm going to move these to the side for right now. So we've got our Cuddle Star panel. I like to give these a quick shake in case the extra nap wasn't vacuumed off or shaken off in the warehouse or wherever they kitted these. So I'm going to first find direction of nap. So when we talk about cuddle, we talk about direction of nap. And I don't know if you can see very well, but there's a sort of a right way to pet it and then a wrong way. This is a digital cuddle. So it's based on C3, our Cuddle 3. And so it's got that 3mm pile. It's really nice. You may see some fold lines on yours. Don't worry about those. If you spritz that with water and even just kind of press it with your hands, those do work out like right away. They're not permanent. The first time you wash this, those will go right away. I'm not going to spray mine now because I don't want to get everything wet right now before we start, but often I'll just spritz with a bottle and then do this with my hands and let it sit and dry. Those fold lines go right away. So direction of nap for this one is going this direction. So what I'm going to do first before I do anything else is I'm just going to mark that because I don't want to forget what the direction of nap was on this. So I'm just going to do just a little mark with an arrow down so I don't have to think about nap again later. And for this, it's got our 50 stars on it. So it's a nice panel here, and it's got exactly the 50 stars on it. So that this is going to be big. I mean, look how big just the stars portion of this is taking up my whole camera space here. And again, this is going to end up, we're going to trim this panel to 27 by 22. So nice big size throw. Some people, when they've seen this Let Freedom Ring kit, thought it was much smaller kit. So I like to just point out that this is a really big, beautiful kit. It's going to be a perfect couch throw for the 4th of July, especially with the 250th this year. So what we're going to do is normally when we're trimming our things down, I would say, I like to trim things so that we cut from the backing. We're always talking about cutting from the backing when we're cutting cuddle. This is based on C3. It's a digital cuddle. And so I don't mind as much using a rotary cutter for this and cutting from the front. I typically don't like to, but there's a design on this and I want to keep that design. I don't want to, if the design somehow was printed slightly askew or something, which this one doesn't look to be, I still want that design to be right in that top left quadrant of the flag. So I'm going to go with what's visible on this versus cutting from the back. So let's go back to overhead view and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to grab my ruler and then I'll grab my rotary cutter as well. I've got a couple of oars here. So it says in the directions, trim the star panel to 27 by 22. And when I say 27, that's the width. Width is 27. The height is 22. And then it specifically has a note that says, take care to keep the stars centered in the trimmed panel. So we don't want to start here and find 27 over because then these stars might get cut off, right? Same thing with that direction. So we want to make sure that everything's been pretty centered. And what I found with this kit is that the 22 by 27 can be pretty well achieved by measuring from the stars on the edges. So I have found that on the left-hand side, if I measure 1.25 inches away from the edge here of these stars, so about 1.25 inches, so I would line my I'm not sure if you guys can see that specific on this ruler, but if I line 1.25 inches up with just that right hand point of these stars all the way up, and I trim here, then when I go 27 over, it should be about 1.25 inches away from this side over here. Okay, so I'm going to use my rotary cutter. Again, normally we don't do this with Cuddle on the front here, but there's going to be seam allowance in this. So we still have a 1/2 inch seam allowance to play with when we're done. So I'm not as worried about the edge not having the extra Cuddle fluff, and I can vacuum up this edge and not make too much of a mess. So I'm going to use my rotary cutter. Like I said, I did about, you know what? I'm double checked my measurements. It was 2 1/4 on the sides, 1 1/4 on the top. So I'm glad I double checked that, because then I would have been short. So I thought it was a little bit far over. See, that was what brought my eye to it, is that this edge here of the blue to the white, it's not exact. So you don't just cut off the white, but it goes a little bit past in some spots. So that's why I did 2 1/4, and that seemed to line up really well with that 27. Sorry about saying the 1 1/4. I'm glad I double checked it. So one, I can never tell on this ruler. Right there, 1/4, 1, 2, 1/4, and the same with this 1, 2. I am one of these people who, when I'm cut, I double check the measurements like 8 times, because I'm constantly doing the wrong measurements. So I'm glad I double checked that for you guys. 1, 2 1/4. Just see, and you can see this on this one, that blue and white are pretty well lined up there. So that 2 1/4 seems right on for this one. And then I'm just going to slide this piece to the side. This can be used for something else. Just put it to the side. And then I'm going to, on the bottom edge here, I've noticed that 1 1/4. So that's where the 1 1/4 comes in from this bottom edge, the bottom edge of the little stars. I've done 1 1/4. It's 1 1/4. And sometimes you got to kind of shift things a little bit. Remember, the Cuddle is going to stretch in the width direction. It's not going to stretch vertically. So there is some forgiveness with the fabric. And again, this is a panel with this very specific print. So I'm more concerned with the print being accurately centered than I am with the Cuddle nap right now. Again, we noted that the nap went down. Oh, that actually reminds me. I'm going to put a mark here that the nap's going down, because I just cut off that white part already. So just reminded myself. So we do care about the nap, but I'm more worried about the edge here. So if I am counting over, I'm just sort of measuring, lining this up. So this is 24 inches. And then I need 3 more inches to get to 27. It's 24. This is 27. Then maybe it was, let's see, 24. That would be 27. So that is less there. So this one maybe is 1/4 1 1/4. Let's see, what if I do 1 1/4, and then 1 1/4. That won't be enough, because that would be 24, 25, 26, 27. Actually, I might have been right the first time that it was 1 1/4 actually. So what you're going to do is, when you get your panel, again, it stretches a little bit in the widthwise direction, so this might not be exact, but you're trying to get this to be square and centered. You want those stars to be centered. So hopefully that makes sense. What I'm trying to do here is, oh, I know what I did. I did 2 1/4 from the center point of the star. That's why. And then if I did that, I did 2 1/4, 1, 2 1/4. Yep. Sorry. It was 2 1/4 from this center point of the star. So not from the edge like I did. It was 2 1/4 from the center point. So that's what I had measured, was 2 1/4 from the center point. So that does give us the 27 inches we need, which is, this ruler is 24 here, and then this one is 3. So that does give it. So I'm going to recut this line over here. Now that I'm sure I have my measurement right. And you can do your centering a totally different way. You could find the center, you know, go to the actual center and mark those. I just like my to go by what the actual measurements were, which was that 22 by 27. And this was how I found was the best way to line it up. Okay, so we 1, 2 1/4 there, and then we would do 2 1/4 there. All right. And then I'm going to double check it again before I cut. Sorry. You know how things go. If I do this now, then I'm going to regret it if it's going to be wrong. So we've got 1, this is 5. And then that's 15. So now we need 27, which would be 1, 2. Okay. Yep, we're good. All right. Thanks for your patience, guys. Let me just get this cut here. All right. So now that's 2 1/4 from that center star. I'm going to turn it around and do the same thing on the other side. And we'll get our 27 inches. In fact, let me do it this way. Let me line that up. 37. Just so we know we've got it. Just like this. And what I'm not doing is pulling this and really trying to get this to measure exactly 27. I really am more concerned with this distance being the same and this distance being the same, so that these stars are really well centered and nothing is skewed. If it ends up being exactly 27, that's perfect, that's great, but I am more concerned with the stars actually being centered. 1, 2 1/4. I'm going to measure from the points again, like I did on that other end. And that's going to pretty much get us to 27. Okay. So, quarter. All right. Just cut that little out there. Okay. So then again, on this end, this is now the top and the bottom. For this one, it was 1 1/4, I think, from the middle edge, from the top. Yeah, it was 1 1/4, which in some instances goes slightly outside of the navy line. However, with that 1/2 inch seam allowance, it'll bring us back into the navy color. So we're not going to see a strip of white. So even if a little bit of white is left, it's fine because we have room to play with that seam allowance. So I'm just going to look at 1 1/4 across. So you can see here the white dips in just a little bit. That's going to be totally fine. Just trying to get a baseline for it being correct. That's that. There we go. Turn around and then just do the top. So you can see on here, there is still just that little strip of white. That's going to be eaten up in the seam allowance, so I'm not worried about that showing later. But we want to start with this all being relatively straight, if that makes sense.
Ajaire, while you're cutting, there's a really great question that Jackie answered over on YouTube, but I think the Facebook people would benefit from it as well.
Oh, yeah.
Odd one, AWED, not ODD. On the odd one asked, well, when you're making a toddler cotton piece quilt, do you recommend using quilting Cuddle on the back or the usual C3? What do you think?
Let's see. I mean, really, you can't go wrong with either. I think to me, it would depend on if you're doing a lot of like some fancy quilting. There's something about C3, the way it puffs up a little bit with the quilting, that I love seeing how the extra quilting looks with the C3. It looks great with quilting Cuddle as well, but I just think with the C3, there's something extra special about it. I also don't have a long arm and don't have, as you know, Sheila, don't have yet an embroidery or anything that I can do any of that, the fancy stitches, without like really struggling with my machine. So I just love seeing it. So anytime I could see C3 with beautiful quilting on the back. However, if you're not planning to do a ton of quilting and are just doing something like we're doing today, where it's going to be the strip quilt, then what I would do is I would just, I would do the quilting cuddle, because the quilting cuddle is a little bit lighter weight. It's still just as soft and lovely. And, but yeah, I really love the backs of quilts with quilting cuddle. We've really just only started to be doing that. And I think there's something special about it. So it just depends on what you're doing for quilting is what I'd say. Do you have a different answer, Sheila? What would you say?
No, I'd say the same thing.
It's funny. It's almost like there's a script and there's not. We kind of all end up having these same preferences in a way with those kind of things, because I just love the way the puffy C3, the quilting just shows so nicely in there. Okay, so now we've got our big panel. It's all cut out and centered. We're going to put this to the side for now because we're not using it yet. This is going to be used later. So we're just going to put this to the side. But we do have some other things to cut. And so we're going to talk about how we cut them. We're not going to cut out every single thing today, just because you don't need to just see me cutting and cutting and cutting, but I want to talk about how we cut the things. So I think it's worth doing some cutting on here. So then, again, the pattern does tell us what we need to cut out of each of those cuts that we already have. So the next one on the list is the cardinal. That is hide in this beautiful cardinal color. So this is Luxe Cuddle Hide. And I'm going to show you guys on the top view what it looks like. It's just beautiful. It's probably not thrilled with my pink background, but this is cut across the width. So it's a whole width of Luxe Cuddle Hide. And so with this, hide is one of those Luxe Cuddles where it can be tricky to find, what is the direction of nap. This is the selvage edge, and it always stretches a little bit from selvage to selvage and doesn't stretch parallel to the selvage. The nap would always go parallel to the selvage. So it would either be this direction or this direction. And in hide, it can be really tricky to tell. So you can just that's what we always say. If you can't tell, then nobody else can. So you can just pick whichever is your favorite way. So I just like to pick a way that's the quote unquote right direction. And then I'm going to mark it on this seam allowance. I'm going to put arrows going down all along, because as I cut strips out of this, I want my strips to know which direction they're supposed to be, even after I've cut them. So I'm just putting a few of these in. I think my strips are going to end up being 4 inches wide, but I can always add more arrows in if I need to, if it doesn't hit a strip. I just do this initially so that, again, I don't want to think about the nap as I go. I just want to be able to get it done and then not really think about it too much. So I've marked those down. This is with a silver Sharpie. You could certainly use something else, but as you can see, it doesn't show through, so I'm not worried about it showing through. So this is telling us to cut out 7 strips of the cardinal that are basically the width of fabric by 4 inches. And then you're also going to cut out of those 7. So it's basically doing 4 inches. I'm putting this fabric down. So it's going to basically be 4 inches, 4 inches, 4 inches, 4 inches, 4 inches all the way across, because this works out to about 7 strips wide. This is that selvage edge down here. So I have it that direction when I'm doing this. There we go. Now you can actually see it. So I'm going to turn this just a little bit. See if you guys can get a little more to the edge. That might help a little bit. There you go. That's just so you can see a little bit more of it at a time. Okay, so what I like to do for this is I'm looking at this edge and I'm seeing, does it look relatively straight? I feel like in these kits, especially with the forgiveness of the nap and everything that comes over and fluffs up with a Luxe Cuddle like this, unless there's some really weird divots or something in the fabric, I very rarely bother even truing this up when I'm doing these strip quilts, because there's seam allowance and you can kind of hide any of those things within the seam allowance. So This one looks good, so I'm just going to start at one edge, and I'll show you what I do when I am cutting these out. So we know we need 7 pieces. Again, I'm not going to cut out all 7 today, but I'm going to show you what I do. I'm going to switch to the black Sharpie just because I feel like my black Sharpie point is a little bit finer, so it doesn't have as thick of a line, because I want to be a little more exact. So let me turn this. So I'm going to measure. Now remember, you're trying to measure from the backing and not that fluff that overhangs. See that fluff there? If you're measuring it from there, then it looks like it weaves in and out because the hide is embossed in a way that kind of moves the fabric, moves the nap around. So you're looking at the backing and you're wanting to use the backing for what you're trying to line up. So I'm going to do 4 inches and I'm lining my 4-inch mark up, and I'm not cutting this with a rotary cutter. I'm going to end up using the craft knife for this because I think it's a little bit faster for me. I'm just used to doing it, and it's a little bit cleaner, a little less mess in the long run. So I've marked 4 inches there. Now I have not gone all the way the width of the fabric yet. I'm just going to do this in sections so that a big piece like this, it's just easier for me to do it this way than to pull the fabric up, make sure it's flat, make sure everything's fine, and then draw the line again. So instead, I'm doing it this way. And I'm lining this 4 inches up with the 4 inches with the Sharpie mark, but I'm lining it up to the left of the Sharpie mark because remember, it's a little bit thicker of a line. So in order to get it right, I'm just doing it from like my 4-inch line is right on the left edge of the marking. So let's get this going. So you just do this across, and then you would just keep going all the way to the 7 across, and then I pull this up, and then I line this up again, and I'll find the next 4 inches, just like this. And I do keep quite a big section down here, so I make sure that my line is not going to end up zigzagging across, because this 5 inches here is straight on the line that I had before. Then this line should, line up pretty well straight with that other one. And then you would just keep going across. And again, I'm going to do this last bit. Now I can make it all the way to the end. So I would mark all my lines first, okay? So I always just try to do all my markings first and then start to cut. So I still have my marks over here that are the arrows pointing down, so I know the direction of nap. The other thing is that this is now saying cut out your 7 strips, and then from the 7 strips, they want you to cut out 4 of them. No, from these strips, cut out 4 that are 4 inches by 33 inches. So basically what they're saying is, out of these super long strips that are the width of the fabric, you're going to have 3 that stay long, and then 4 of them. So 4 of the 7 we want to be 33 inches, okay? Which is, I don't know, about right there or something. So this is how we're going to cut those, and I just mark it in ahead of time. So this long strip here this is the 4 inches we want, so we need 33 inches of this cut out. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to line up this ruler to where you can see it. I'm going to line up the 23 edge, and I just put a little mark just so I can kind of see where 23 is, and then I'm going to go 10 over from that because it's supposed to be 33. So these smaller strips are going to be sorry, I have a glare from the light, so I'm trying to just see. You guys probably have a glare too. So that would be 33. So halfway, because these are about 58 to 60 inches, halfway would only be here and not the full 33. And they want 33 for the pattern. So we couldn't just cut these strips and then cut it in half to make these. So the rest of this piece that I cut this 33 out of is just going to be extra, and we can use it for something else. Okay. So 4 of these strips are going to be, we're only using 33 inches of it. So what I would do is this one here, I didn't finish drawing this line earlier, but I can just do it right now. Where's my inch? Inch. Just do a little more of it just so you can see. And then this one would also be at this 33. Okay, so there'd be 4 of these down that we would just use this 33 section. The rest of the 3 that we've cut are going to be the long strips. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. And you're going to do something similar with the white fabric. Once you have everything marked, that's when I start to cut. But I'll just start cutting now because we're here and I can. Okay, so I'm going to cut using the Olfa SAC1 blade. You could use a rotary cutter for this because we do have seam allowance. So any of the nap that we would want to hang over or whatever, we do have seam allowance for that. So you could use a rotary cutter. It's just going to cut off all the nap and make more of a mess. You could also use micro serrated scissors. I like the craft knife, so that's what I'm going to use. So I would just start. And again, I make sure my marking for direction of nap is within. If not, I would draw another arrow right when I start. And you're just gonna, this is a little bit dull here. Let's see if I can make it a little bigger. This one needs to be replaced. All right. It's a little bit dull. I've been doing a lot of cutting. So I'm actually gonna replace it now. So actually this is great. This SAC1 blade is really nice because they're easily replaceable. I actually have the replacements here. And so you just take one of the replacements. I've been putting when I've been traveling, I don't like to put them just in the trash can. So when I've been traveling, I've been putting them right back into that same container just as a place to put them. But I have a safe can here that I can put them in. So I'll put them both in there now, but that's why one of them fell out and was shorter. So this just goes right in here. There's a little dot there that it gets put into. And then this clips onto there. And then the end goes back on there. And then the nice thing about this is that there are sections. So if just a section gets dull, you can use this end to pull it off. Okay. So anyway, there we go. All right, and this is, yeah, now this is going to cut like butter. So yeah, that just cuts so nicely, barely even like touching it. So I just kind of do it like this and I, kind of pull it apart with my fingers as I go. So I'm just going across the lines that we already drew. Now here, I know that I'm going to use this as a small strip. So I'm just going to cut there, that little, at the 33 line. And I would do the same thing here. Just cut that. And then if my line was drawn all the way, I would do that. So what I would do is that I wouldn't, this one, because I cut it off, I would vacuum this piece. But then as I'm cutting, I would just pull this up, straighten it, and I'm not shaking it around and making that fluff go everywhere. I'm just sliding it up and then continuing to cut along so that you're kind of containing that cuddle dust and keeping it to a minimum. So that's how I would cut that. Let me just grab my vacuum real quick and I will vacuum that part up so it's not super dusty. Quick little vacuum up. All right. So, and I already have my strips cut for us today, but that was just showing you guys how to cut that one. All right. So that's how you would cut the hide. And then the next thing on the list is another piece of hide. This is the hide in snow, which is this beautiful white color. Probably looking a little bit pink on the screen because of my pink down there. But this one, same thing. It's telling you to cut, instead of 7 strips, it's telling you 6 strips, 4 inches. And then from that, you're going to take 3 of them and cut them at that 33 line once you've cut them. So same thing as we did with the red, we would mark the backing. And I like to mark everything first, then cut it out. Okay, so we're not doing that today. We also have this smaller strip, and this is Luxe Cuddle Hide in navy. When you do these strip quilts, there's often a piece for binding. Okay, almost always is a piece for binding. However, it can be confused with other strips sometimes. This is the backing. As I said, the backing is included here. The backing is, I'm going to overhead this so you can see. The backing is stars embossed. Okay, so it's the same color. It's navy, same color as this hide. But see how the embossing, that's more like, an animal's hide. But this is these beautiful stars. So this one's not super confusing. I feel like it's obvious that this is the backing. But anytime I do any of these strip quilts, I'm always taking a second look to make sure I've got the piece that is truly the binding before I do anything else. So I already knew with this kit, so I wasn't worried about it. But I don't want to accidentally cut other strips and cut other pieces away and then lose my beautiful binding piece. So I usually set my binding aside first if I can. Out of that backing came this little Made with Love label. This has the care instructions on the back. So we'll talk about that later, about where we're going to put that in this quilt. But most of the kits come with one of those labels. So we are going to talk about the binding now. And again, I just cut my binding now too. I want to get all the cutting done. And then again, we don't have to think about it. So with the binding, with Cuddle, we'll do raw edge binding. So we're just going to be cutting these 1 3/4 inch strips, and we'll sew it down to the back of the finished flag quilt and then turn it around to the front. And we're not double turning it. So you're not turning it under and then turning it under. You don't need to double fold it. So we're just turning it up, and then all of the excess fluff can hang over the backing. And so you won't even see the backing. We'll just, zigzag or something to tack it down. And that's how we do our bindings with Luxe Cuddle. We do them all the time. It's a beautiful way to do it. So for this, because we're going to be using the actual edge, I do tend to trim up with my knife, whatever edge, like the edges, or I plan to use whatever edge this is as the part that's going to be sewn down, and then the other part can be flipped over. Because what I want is the edges that are going to be flipped over, the raw edges, as we call them, I want them to have enough overhang that it's going to look really nice, and we're not going to catch and see any of this actual bad backing. We don't want to see the backing when we're done. So I always use my craft knife for this step, just because it makes it really nice and crisp. And we've got lots of videos out there about how to cut Cuddle. But with the craft knife, you're cutting just the backing. So it's not cutting down and cutting through all of that nap and just destroying that beautiful nap that we want to come over. Because there isn't going to be a seam allowance on that other side. There's a seam allowance on one edge, but not on the other. So I like to cut with the knife when I do this. So the same thing that I would do with when I did the other strips is I would measure across. So this says to do 5 strips that are 1 3/4 inch by the width. So I would measure out, like I can see on this that this is a little bit choppy. So we definitely would want to trim this edge up. So instead of 1 3/4, I would do, that's 1 3/4. I would maybe even do 2. And let me just see if that's going to work. 1, 2, 3. I was just making sure the width of this had enough that I could waver a little bit. So first one, I'm going to cut at 2 inches, and then I'm going to come by and put a line to mark the 1 3/4, if that makes sense. So what I'm doing here is I'm lining this edge up with this edge, and then on the backing, you can actually see the knitted backing. You can kind of see the knitted stitches. So it's almost a way to make sure you're straight. You can kind of see it on there. So I am going to do that. And I'm actually going to use my silver Sharpie again because it shows up better on this black. But let me see if I can find it. Oh, here it is. It fell. Sorry about that. Okay. So I'm going to mark. And again, I'm just going to mark this much. I'm not going to go all the way down yet. And then this one, I'm going to do it exactly 1 3/4 from that marking. So I'm going to mark this one. So again, 1, so that was 1 and it's 2 1/4. 3/4. So now 1, 1, 2, 3/4. I'm upside down here, so I just want to make sure I have it right. 1 3/4. Okay. 3/4. Then this one, so we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we need 5 of them. 1 3/4. So now on this one, now from that line that we drew, I'm going to mark 1 3/4 away from that. Just so we have a nice edge there with, the, we'll cut it with a knife. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Oops, I just moved it, of course. Okay. I'm just going to hold this down here because it's a little puffy. Okay. So now all of those lines would be cut nicely with the knife, and so we'd have really nice edges there that could be used for that overhang. I would do the same thing where I would go all the way down, and then before I did any cutting, so I'd mark all my lines out, and then I would do all my cutting. So I'm not going to cut today just because we have so much other stuff that's already been cut out, but I just wanted to show you guys how I would cut the binding, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. And again, we do have lots of videos out on YouTube, on the Shannon Fabrics YouTube page, that talks about how we're going to do the binding, how to cut binding in the Cuddle Studio that we have out there. I know for sure that playlist has some binding mentions on there for sure. So the last thing we have is the stars fabric. Now this fabric, just here I want to move my little blade so I don't actually accidentally cut myself with a blade. So let me just put those to the side real quick. Otherwise, we might have an accident. We don't want to have an accident live, do we? No. Okay, so from it says to trim the backing to 60 by 40. I'm not actually going to trim it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the backing and just want to make sure that it measures 60 by 40 at least. And then trimming I can do later. So I want to make sure it's the right size before we get started. I just always like to double check, but I'm not actually going to do the trimming right now. So let's see. So this color, my camera is not super in love with. It's looking black, but it's the backing of the navy stars. So I'm just going to do a double check that it measures. That's where 30 is. So yeah, we'll measure 60. And then let's measure the other direction. I want to make sure I've got at least 40. Other stuff can be trimmed off later. So I just want to make sure that it's at least got what I need. Yeah, and it's got up to 46 even. So plenty of real estate on this. I'm not worried about trimming it now. You could certainly trim yours now. I just know that as I go, things can shift a little bit with Cuddle. And so, so I'm not going to do any trimming ahead of time. All right, so here you can kind of see those beautiful stars. I think it shows up pretty well here. So again, let's find the direction of nap. These stars are embossed. So it's one of those things where there isn't a super easy way to tell the direction of nap. But all the parts that aren't the stars to me seem to be going in this direction. So I'm going to say that the direction of nap is pointing down toward me. So I am going to mark that on the top here in the seam allowance. So over here, I'm just going to mark. And I don't need to mark it and keep marking down as I go because I'm not cutting anything out of this. We're using this backing. We're going to be basically with our strip quilts, we're going to be doing like a quilt as you go type of method. So we're going to be putting these pieces on here. The pieces that we just cut, we're going to be putting them on here and stitching them in place and flipping the other pieces down. We'll go through the whole thing as we go. So it's quilting through the backing as we go along. Some people want to do batting in theirs, and you're totally welcome to use batting. I'm not using batting on this one. I like the fluidity of it when it doesn't have the batting. It's still nice and warm, but it's just got a drape that's a little bit nicer without the batting. If I make it for my girls, they both have big strip quilts, and when I put some batting in there because they like the extra thicky squishiness of it, but it makes it a little bit stiffer. It doesn't drape as nicely, if you know what I'm saying. So something like this, where this will probably be for either bringing to 4th of July fireworks or for the couch or something. I want that drapiness. So I'm not going to put binding in. Not binding, batting inside. If you do go to use batting, the Poly Request, Quilter's Dream Poly Request is the one that I like the best. It's polyester, so you want to make sure this fabric is 100% polyester. So you want to make sure you're using a polyester batting so that they're not fighting each other when you're washing them. The cotton could shrink. So we're going to use polyester batting if you are going to use batting. But again, I'm not using batting today, so that's a total decision you can make. If I was going to do the batting, I would use something like this 505. I love this 505. This is an Odif product. We use it quite often. I like it because to me, it does not have a smell. I'm very, very sensitive to smells. And so I can use it inside and I don't feel like I need to wear a gas mask. It's not super strong. It also is just a temporary adhesive, so it washes right off. But it also, you can lift the fabric up after you've glued it down. It doesn't stick completely for a little bit, so you can move it around if you misplaced it, and then you can kind of pat it down into position and it'll stick a little bit, then it'll stick pretty well. But I like it because I can reposition things. So what I would do is I would spray this and then put batting down on it. So I would be adhesing the batting to the backing. And then all the rest of the steps that we do, where we're going to talk about putting the strips right on here and sewing them onto the backing, you would be sewing them onto the batting, but through the backing too, if that makes sense. So I would first just totally adhere the batting to the backing, if that's what I was going to do. Again, I'm not, but that's what I would do. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are going to start putting the whole thing together. So before we actually start the strip quilt portion of it, we're going to talk about more of the supplies. We already talked about the 505 spray. So we're going to use that to kind of keep the layers, the strips as we go, keep them in place. We're also going to be using pins. We got my Clover flower head pins. We love these ones. So you need quite a few of them. I do have an extra box here. When I've been teaching and traveling, I have them in this little box. So I'm sure at some point I'll need to take the extra pins out of here and use them. We're going to be using, you've already saw me use the craft knife. So I used that already. No more cutting. So I'm done with the cutting for now. And I'm going to use my sewing machine. I'm going to be using 100% polyester thread in there because again, polyester fabric. This fabric does have a stretch across the width to it, and that polyester thread is a little bit stronger and will hold up better to any tugging that happens on the couch. So that's what I'm going to be using today. If there's any more supplies, buy any stiletto. So I really like a stiletto. Whatever's your favorite stiletto, use it. We'll probably, once we get over to the sewing machine, you'll see how that'll go. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to be putting the first strip down, and then we're going to sew the second strip to it. So I'm just going to show you how that would happen. I'm not going to actually sew those ones because I've already got the first section done, but I'm going to show you how we would do it. So what we would do is we've got our fabric down. This is our backing, and this is the top. Remember, we pointed an arrow down, so the nap is going down here. So this is the top right corner of the flag. And in the top right corner of the flag is where our mini strips are going to go. So remember, we had these strips. These are the 33-inch strips that we cut off of the 4-inch strips that went across the whole width. And remember, I put in the seam allowance, I put that arrow going down, so I remember which way my nap goes. And we're going to want the red one to go right up to the top. So I am lining this up pretty well with this edge here and this here. Again, I didn't trim this yet. So if I was a little bit further down, that would be okay too. I just want to make sure it's straight. I can trim it all up nicely later, but I don't want to trim a ton off this strip later. This I don't mind, this I don't want to be cutting off because then the stripes will be different sizes as we go. So I want to be able to just adhere to whatever the 1/2 inch seam allowance is for binding there later. But this edge here is pretty straight, so I probably would line it up just to the edge. And then what you would do is you'll take, it's probably loud. I usually use a sheet. This is some, what do you call it? Like craft butcher paper stuff. The, I can't think of what it's called. But anyway, the stuff that, you know, your kids use to paint on the counter. This is so that any overspray from the 505 lands on this and not on your mat and not on the nap of the pieces around you. I normally use a big sheet, but I used that, the sheet that I normally use for that, I used in my garden earlier this season when there was a frost. I covered my plants up with it and then I washed it. But since I've used it outside, I don't feel comfortable using my studio again now. The nice thing about just using an old sheet is that you can just wash it because the 505 spray washes right out. So when it gets, you know, too much overspray on it, you can wash it. But again, I've used it outside now. So now it's like my outside sheet. So I just have to get another cheap sheet to use for this. But so what I would do is I'd make sure that this is here for overspray. And then I would just spray this and pat it right into place. So this strip is not sewn down yet. It's just going to be spray basted in place. So it would be completely sprayed. And then I would take the next strip, which is the white. You know, we're doing the red and white stripes for the flag here. Again, I have my arrows that are pointing down. And so I know that this is going to want to end up like this, but to get it sewn on, we need to sew these edges together, okay? So I would pin through all the layers here. I'd be pinning through the white, through the red, through the backing. If there was batting in there, it'd be through there as well. On this edge here, I'm going to try to line these two edges up as well as I can, those edges, because later when I come to put the stars portion of the flag this direction, it's going to be easier if these line up pretty well. If this hangs over the edge a little bit, I can trim that edge off later, that whole edge. So I'm not worried about that. So as you go across, you're going to pin this in place and then stitch it. I've already done a bunch of the stripes, so let's go to the one that I've done and then we'll continue on. I will show you how we sew some of those strips just so you can see what it looks like. But I didn't want you to have to sit through all 6 of them or however many stripes there are. So I've already done a bunch of it. So we have, how many are done here? So we have 5 of these done. So we started with that red. Again, this has been temporary spray basted with that Odif. Again, you can pull it up and then you can pat it back down. So that's really nice. Then the white, red, white, red. This one has not been spray basted down. So I'm going to show you how we do that. I still have 2 more strips to do in this right upper quadrant. So this I'm going to use now. I'm going to cover up this part here because as I spray, I don't want to be overspraying and getting the top of the nap there. Again, it would wash out, but I feel like if I don't want to have to wash it immediately after I'm done, that's always nice. I'll run this here. My piece is not quite as big as my big sheet used to be, so I had to kind of move it. So now I pull this down. I make sure my backing is pretty flat because this is now just going to adhere temporarily to the backing. But I do kind of give this, we want this seam to be fully popped out. So I do kind of pull it a little bit. Remember, the Cuddle fabric, this Luxe Cuddle, it doesn't stretch in this direction. It's only stretching in this direction. So I don't mind giving it a little bit of a tug because I'm not skewing it. I'm not pulling and stretching the, like making it actually stretch. I'm just making sure all of that seam allowance is out. All right, so now that I know I have it where I want it, that's when I can pat it in place. Sorry, my camera's going to shake because it's attached to the table, but hopefully you don't get too dizzy. So now that 505 spray has locked this in place. If this wasn't exactly where I want it, I could lift it up and then pat it back down, okay? But now what we do, oops, there's actually, see, that's the other thing is it just stuck to itself there, but I can come back, undo it, and then stick it back down. which is what I like. Some of the other sprays I've used are too tacky, too sticky. Okay, so now we've got another white strip that we need to put on this. I'm going to move this out of the way. We don't need this right now. So now we'll show you how we actually sew these down. So again, here's a white strip. Those are my arrows pointing down. So we want the nap. We want all of our naps as we pet this to go in the same direction. All of this has already been stitched in place. Just this last strip. Well, there's 2 more strips that need to be done. So now again, I'm going to try to line up this one pretty well, this edge pretty well. And then if that overhangs later, we can trim that off. I'm not too worried about that. So let's line this up here. And as you're doing this, you want to note that you're trying to match the backings of each of these pieces and not this over fluff. See all that white and red that can overhang? You want to actually make sure you're catching the backing. So I'm going to pin this one in place too. And then we just sort of pat everything in place. Put one in the middle here. Another one. And you're just going to do a bunch of pins here. Because this is a bigger strip quilt piece, we want to make sure we got lots of pins to hold everything in place because there is weight in this. Even without the batting, there is weight in there. So it's going to want to pull away from your sewing machine as you're doing it. So the pinning really helps. We do the regular double pinning that we always do with Cuddle. So I'm pinning in the direction that I'm going to be stitching from. So I can remove these pins as I go. It's awkward for me to pin it this way like this, but it's going to be nice in the end because I can pull them out as I go along. And then we are going to do a double row of pins. The second row here, this will hold the fabric in place past the presser foot. So these pins are out of the way of where the presser foot would be going. So the presser foot can go right by it. So this helps with any shifting. If you haven't seen, most of you are here most weeks, but if you haven't seen the double pinning method before, that's what this is for, is to help prevent any shifting. We don't want any shifting happening with the fabric. So we have to pull those first row of pins out before we can sew over that section because we're never sewing over pins. And so when we pull this one out, that second one is there to kind of keep us in line. And again, we're just pinning through all the layers. If you had batting in there, you'd be pinning right through the batting. The key is that you're getting all the way down into the backing. All right, so I've got it all pinned. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and I will change my screen to over there so you guys can see what's going on over there. And we'll talk about our settings. So hopefully my shoulder's not too much in your view there, but I try to get the whole thing up on the screen as much as I can, okay? Because, not on the screen, sorry, up on the table. Because if it's hanging off, this fabric is going to be pulling, okay? So we're going to get this up and under here. Remember, my pins are pointing toward the machine. With my machine, I need to kind of tug the first threads a little bit. So just tug those. Then that first pin I can take out. I've got my stiletto, and you'll see that as I go, I'm going to be lifting things up often. I have my needle in the down position, so it's always going to land down as I'm stitching. And I'm going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance across here. And I'm trying to match the right edge of my presser foot here is about 1/2 inch, so I match this backing. Again, we're not going with the fluff part, we're going with where the backing is. Match that up with that part of my presser foot. And my settings are a straight stitch, 3.5 millimeters. And you can kind of figure out what your machine is going to prefer. I'm using a lighter color thread in here because I'm hoping when I flip it to the back, you guys can see some of my stitches. I think I'm actually using like a white color. Often we'll use like a gray or something that's not going to show up. But I kind of wanted you guys to see, so I'm hoping those will show. I'm saying I'm hoping because you would think white would show up on the navy blue, but that Luxe Cuddle fluffs up so much around the stitches that it may not show as well as I want it to. We'll see. So we're just going to stitch all the way across. And again, you see me, I'm just constantly making sure this part's not caught inside. It's not hanging off the edge of the table here. It's all on the table, so there's no weight pulling everything and shifting it to the side. If you had batting in there, it would become even more important to make sure it's not heavy and weighed down. Just get to the end of here. Okay. All right. And then as we're approaching this last bit here, when I get to the end here, I am going to do one back stitch, and then I'm going to lock my stitch. And I'm doing that because my lock stitch doesn't work super well, so I still do one back stitch. Remember, this is ending to where we're technically quilting the back of this when we're doing this. So we want the stitches to look nice on the end there. We're not stitching off for this part. So that's why I just kind of lock that stitch in there to make it look nice. We can trim those threads off. Just get this out of the machine. Okay. So now I'm just going to trim that thread. You could also trim these later, but if I'm here and have my little snips, see my locking, it doesn't always lock it perfectly. So that's why I just did that back stitch for one. Now, once you have your lines stitched across, you can take out these pins. So take the second row of pins out once they've done their duty and held everything in place. And then we'll come back to the overhead view so that we can see how well everything went together. And I am just going to snip these threads over here too, just get them snipped. And I'll bring this back over to the other view. Okay, so now we're overhead again. Let's just get this laid out here. So now we have our next strip that's been put in place. Again, I'm trying to make sure the backing is nice and flat here, but also not hanging off the edge of the table because we don't want that weight pulling things askew. Because I'm going to spray base this one in place now. This looks a little wrinkled up there, but it's not. So I'm going to want to spray base this one in place now. So I just make sure this backing is nicely in where it needs to be. So I'm going to take my piece of paper again, just so I can spray. Don't worry about any overspray. Here. So the Odif really just keeps, that 505 spray keeps everything nicely in position while we're stitching it till we, to take it over. Obviously we've pinned it really well, but just the pinning on its own, when you get the heft of the cuddle in there, it's nice having the extra security of that 505 spray. All right, so that's in position. I'm going to tap this down and I'm going to show you one more piece doing just the same thing. Okay, so we're going to be using, this is the red strip, and we're going to get this one in place now. Okay, just make sure, yep, we start and end with a red here. I remember, got my arrow there pointing down, so I know it's going to want to go this way. Again, with the hide, no one would probably notice if it went the other way. I just like, if I've done these ones that direction, that this one goes that direction, if that makes sense. So we could have chosen the whole thing to be the other direction in terms of nap with hide, but I like them to be consistent in the same quilt, in the same piece. So my nap's going to go down, which means this now is going to flip up, and this is what we're going to stitch together. So bear with me while I pin this one again. My knife, this is a magnetic pin holder, so it caught it. Do you guys, I don't know if you guys ever heard this in grade school, but I always heard that the reds always go on the outside edges so that the white wouldn't get as dirty in the flag. So I always know that it starts with red and ends with red, and that the middle section, the short ones, also ended with red. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I was taught, that in the 13 stripes are for the 13 original colonies, I believe. Just some flag facts while we're pinning this together. The double pinning does take time, but I will say, as someone who really, really doesn't like pinning, Cuddle is one of the few places that I do take the time and do my pinning. It makes such a big difference in the end. You're not struggling with your machine as much, especially as you get more and more weight on these things. It really just is worth the effort of the pinning. But I was excited when this kit came that it was truly, the 13 stripes, has all 50 stars. So it really is a great representation of a flag. It's not just flag-ish, right? It's the real thing when it's done. And it's a really big, beautiful throw that is going to be really special. Okay, so let's do our second row. Get this done. And when we're done with these ones, then we're going to show you how you get the stars panel on there. So these come together pretty quickly. The longest part really is the pinning, because the pinning takes longer even than the stitching. And the cutting, there's always cutting, which is why I like to get all the cutting done ahead of time. Some people kind of cut as they go, but especially with Cuddle, I like to get all my cutting done. Any of that Cuddle fluff is all taken care of, and then you can just enjoy the stitching.
Ajaire, there is one question from Stephanie on Facebook. She's talking about the back stitching and the possibility of, at the end of the rows, when you're trimming a little bit, trimming that back stitching off if it weakens the seam at all. What do you think?
So I'm back stitching here in the middle. So I'm not going to be trimming this part. This is actually where that flag panel is going to go. So the flag panel itself is going to be stitched down here. So technically I do not have to back stitch because the seam itself is going to be secured with that the stars panel. I said the flag panel, the stars panel. So these stitches are going to be secured by that. So I'm not worried about back stitching for that reason. I'm back stitching because my locking stitch doesn't work very well, and so I back stitch and then lock stitch it, and then that's just double protection for later. I just don't want my threads to unravel from the back later, even just to where the star panel gets stitched in, because I'm using white thread, so it will show on the back if it does unravel. So I'm not worried about the integrity of the seams. It's really just for how it's going to look in the end on the backing. Like if you stopped your quilting in the middle of a quilt, you'd want to make sure that you had some sort of knot in there, and then, ran the thread through underneath later, hid the thread. I'm just doing it with a back stitch and then a lock stitch on my machine and then trimming. So it's not going to show everything will fluff up around from the back through. So I'm not worried about that. On the other end, I'm not back stitching because the binding, when we put the binding on, even if we trim this up, we're going to sew binding down onto this. So that binding stitch is going to secure it in place. You certainly could, if you were worried about a really big strip quilt and kind of manhandling it as you go and worried your seams are going to come undone somehow on the ends there, you certainly could backstitch here. I'm just not doing it because, as you're seeing with my machine, I have to kind of pull the threads a little bit to get it going. So if I did a backstitch, my machine might get angry at me. So, but that's a really good question. All right, I'm going to switch over to the machine. We're just going to stitch this last one, and then we'll talk about that star panel. All right, so you've already seen how we do this. Again, I kind of get my threads to the back, but I'll show you again. So I'm not back stitching this first part. Again, we certainly could if we wanted to. I'm just not, because my machine doesn't love that. So I'm going to pull these threads a little bit. Actually, you know what? I do backstitch a little bit. You might have seen me backstitch. Sometimes I do, because since I've pulled it, I always worry that my stitches are a little too long, because we've already got a lengthened stitch and I'm pulling it, which might make the stitch even longer. So sometimes I do a quick little back stitch there, which you may have seen, Stephanie. So that may have been, I didn't say to do it, but you may have seen me do it. But that's, again, not necessarily to secure the threads. It's more just something weird my machine and I have to do. You always get used to your machine. And when it's a little bit older like mine, there's little quirks that you just have to kind of deal with. So yours may not want to do any of the stuff that I was just saying. So this may seem like this is a big bunchy mess, but it's really not. I'm making sure here when it's under the actual thing, this is all light and fluffy. This is bunched here so that it's not hanging off the table and having weight, but it's also not pulling at this. So it's just, it looks funny here, but I'm making sure constantly that I don't have anything caught underneath. I can see it all here. It's not caught underneath. These ends are here. But I do pause, and you'll see me pause once in a while just to make sure nothing is getting caught and everything's nice and flat when it's getting under the presser foot. There's a lot of forgiveness with the Cuddle and with these Luxe Cuddles, especially. These are, all sort of Luxe Cuddle hides. And I laugh because hide really does hide a lot of your mistakes. That's not why it's called that, obviously. But if your lines for these stripes are not perfectly straight, if you're stitching, you do that lock stitch and it shows on the other side, the Luxe Cuddle will fluff up around your stitches in a way that will hide any kind of weird little mistakes that you may have made. So just go slow, but don't worry too much about it. I feel like if you overly fret, then you can be pulling your fabrics askew. You're trying to make your fabric do things it doesn't want to do. So if you've pinned really well, the pins and the 505 spray are doing the bulk of the work for you. And then having something like a stiletto to really help guide the fabrics through is just sort of like the little extra on top. So again, I just do like a back stitch and then a lock stitch. Simply from my machine, because I never am convinced that lock stitch actually locks anything. It's the same reason I'm not using the cut stitch, the cutter. My cutter, it cuts fine, but then the next stitch you do, the thread ends up getting all wound around itself and gets angry and doesn't come off. So I don't use my cutter. That's why I'm using little snips to cut my threads. You may have a cutter that works beautifully, and then that would, then you can just use that. You don't have to do it this way. This is just, we adapt, right? Okay, so we'll take these pins out and then we'll move on to the next step. I do love these colors. This cardinal is just beautiful against the navy. My 15-year-old already has declared she wants this for herself. She was very excited when she saw the kit. She didn't even see how big it was, and she was already excited. So when she finds out it's this big, she's going to be thrilled. Okay, let's go back over here. So now we just need to use the 505 to get this last stripe to be nice and flat. Just temporarily get it into place there. So again, we get that nice and flat. I get the rest of this here so nothing's hanging off the edge and causing any problems there. It's nice and flat. All right, so now we'll get our paper back up here. I've been asked before about reusing that same piece of paper and why it's not making the top sticky when I'm putting, like if I had sticky stuff here, why it's not sticky. And the nice thing is that the 505 spray does dry pretty quickly. So by the time I've gone to spray the next thing, my paper is mostly dried where the 505 spray was. So it's not sticky still. So it's not getting onto this part. It's really only sticky when it's still wet. So it's dry. Once it's dried, it's usually pretty okay. All right. So I'm just trying to tap this into place, get it locked in. And I'm just pulling it a little bit to make sure that seam allowance is opened up there. Okay, so now that's the whole top right part of our flag. Okay. And again, this is a big one. So this may look like this is the whole thing and you may think we're putting the stars here. No, this is just the top part of the flag. And now the stars are going to go to the left here. Before we do that, I just want to look at the back really quick and just kind of see what's been happening on the back. See if we can see the stitching. So again, we've got those stars. But yeah, you can see pretty well the stitching there because I used a white, or at least I can see them. I'm not sure if you can. But what's nice is that when we're done, if we don't want these stitches to show, we can just use a stiletto and just kind of come around them. Even in these embossed sections, we can just make it so that those stitches are not really visible. So we can still see all the stars, because we may want just to be able to see a field of stars. Sometimes with your backing, you really want to see all the stitching. But if you didn't want to and you really just wanted to see those beautiful embossed stars, you can just fluff up your stitches around them. And then when you're all done, it'll just look like the little stars there, okay? So we've been sewing through all the layers. This is basically like quilt as you go, okay? So that's all locked in. So let's put it back this way. And then we do need to now address the next part, which are those stars. So we have that star panel that we did. And we didn't do this side. We only cut, when I did it with you guys, where's the one I did with you guys? I did cut both sides. Here's this one. This is the one I cut with you guys today. All right, we cut all the way around it. I didn't do that with this one because I was thinking I can just trim it up when we're done. So I cut these 3 sides the same way. I just didn't cut this one because the nap goes in this direction. So this is going to be the left-hand side, which can just be trued up later. So I didn't bother trimming this side. It just gives me some room to play with if I needed it with that binding. So this is going to end up here. But first we got to stitch it down. So because we're doing that stitch as you go, we're going to stitch it this direction. Okay, so we're going to line it up. We're going to stitch it like this direction here. Does that make sense? And so we're wanting to make sure that when we're done, we want this corner to line up really well, because later we're going to sew more strips all the way across here to do the last few strips on our 13 strips. Okay, the 13 stripes. All right, so, but we're going to be stitching this direction. So what we're going to do is we're going to pin it all in place. Now remember, I was trying to line these up pretty well just to give us an easy line to follow. And they're not perfect, but the backings, like this hangs over a little bit, but the backing itself lines up pretty well. And again, you can just kind of see the markings in the back of the cuddle itself. So it's pretty well lined up. So I am just going to get this into place with those naps kind of running different directions there. It can be hard to line this up, but this edge we want to line up and then that to go straight up, okay? So I'm going to pin. We're going to be pinning starting here and stitching that way. So I'm going to point my pins down toward me like that. And I'm going to put 2 in just to get started. And I'm going to put the one up here. Get that in nice to place nicely. Go. And then I just kind of pat this all in place. And again, we're going to double pin. Now this, when we sew this one, we're going to be going over some of these seams that we've sewn this direction. So I really want to make sure everything's nicely pinned because we don't want to be causing any lumps or bumps in this star panel here. Okay. So really just pin it nicely in place. Cut myself with that pin. And then we're going to double pin just because we want to make sure everything doesn't shift. This is that 3mm pile, and then height, I believe, has 10 millimeters. So the differences in pile heights, plus all of these seam allowances going that direction, you just really want these double pins in here to keep everything nice and secure. I'm excited to see Christina join us to do this same kit on the long arm because she has some little tricks up her sleeve for that we can't really do as easily with our regular machine. As I said, these strip quilts are kind of quilt as you go, but you certainly could do more quilting within even these panels. It's just not easy for me with my machine the way it is, but you certainly could do a lot more quilt as you go, not just the strips if you wanted to. Okay, so now we're going to go stitch this down and into place. Let's get back to that machine view. Oops, just this one. All we want is this one. Sure why it's doing that. I want to go with this one. No, this one. Sorry. Okay, now we're going back over to the machine. Okay, so now this is now in the center of the quilt, so it's a little bit tricky, which is why I have this lighter weight section going to be on our side here. So that's why I pinned it this way. It's going to be a lot easier to do just having this here versus all of this bulk underneath the arm there. But we still want the whole thing up on the table. We want to make sure we are not caught up anywhere. We are going to backstitch here just for that same reason that I was backstitching on these ends here and lock it, just because this is going to be in the middle of the backing of the quilt. And so we don't want it to look funky there in the back. So let me find my bobbin thread as well. My machine wants me to pull those threads. So that's what it wants me to do. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, do that, and then I'm going to back stitch and then lock stitch. Just only because it's right in the middle there. Okay, so you can see my machine's going a little bit slower because of all that thickness there. And this smooth texture of the backing on this digital cuddle here, it's wanting to go a little slower. So I'm going to have to be really careful to make sure everything's light and airy. I'll use my stiletto to help get over the humps. Make sure nothing's caught underneath. Don't cut your finger with the pins as you're taking them out. That helps. You definitely don't want to be getting any blood on the back of your quilt. That would be terrible after all this work. Oh, I do have a little bit. I'm going to grab a tissue really quick because I don't want to get anything on the backing of this. That one, it barely even hurt. Normally when I stab myself, it hurts real bad with these pins, but that one didn't hurt, but I just caught the edge of the skin enough. So. Okay. Then. If you're having trouble getting through, you could up your stitch length a little bit more if you wanted to. I knew mine would make it through, so I didn't bother, but that is another tip you could do there if your layers were starting to get to your machine. All right, so there at that end, I didn't bother to backstitch. I'm not as worried on this end here. So I didn't backstitch that one. And make sure that this is not going to bleed on our project. Yep, we're good. So that's how I always say, you know, it's live because something happens, right? Something falls over, someone gets cut. That's how you guys know it's live, right? All right, and then I'm just taking my second row of pins out, and then I'm just going to trim those two little threads. The one from the back. It's locked in there. There we go. All right, let's bring it back over. And we'll take a look at what we're going to do next. Okay, so now we've got the whole top edge at least stitched in place, okay? So I'm gonna let this part hang over the edge there. I'm just trying to get it to where you guys can see it. So this is what we just stitched. Now this part here is gonna come over here. And it's gonna look so nice, you guys. It's gonna look really, really nice. So now I am going to spray base this in place. Now I am not going to do any quilting in here right now. You certainly could. You could. I can just imagine some beautiful, beautiful quilting that could be done in here. I am not going to do that because my machine will fight me the whole time. I probably will come in and maybe just do some lines later. I haven't really decided what I want to do for quilting this section. I don't have batting in here, so technically I don't have to quilt it at all. It'll still stay just fine in there. The ODF will wash away, so the wash away will go away, and then the layers could separate a little bit in there, but for the most part, Cuddle backings want to stick together, so I'm not worried about that. But yes, here you could certainly do any kind of quilting you want in there. But for now, I'm just going to spray base this in place so that we can move on and do the next steps. All right, so to do that, I'm going to get my papers. Got a couple of them just so that I can make sure I don't overspray onto my table at all. Here, here, like that, and then I actually have one for over here too. Oh. Just because I don't want to accidentally spray anything up there too. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this in parts. I'm going to spray this part down, fold it over, and then the next part and the next part. Because again, I don't want to be pulling this. Now this direction does stretch, so I don't want to get it askew. I'm not trying to skew it at all, just trying to get it to where it's in the right place. So I'm going to pull this down. Again, the 505 is forgiving. If it's not where I want it to be, I can lift it up and put it where it wants to be, or where I want it to be. Put that in place. Then I'm just going to put this back over, kind of to where I can feel the tackiness right there. So I'm just going to put more on here. Pull it down again. I'm wanting to make sure this top edge is relatively well lined up. You'll see these stars becoming skewed if you pull anything too much, so we want to make sure we're not doing that. Just really patting this part down because I know that part's where I want it. Lift this up. See, I'm just kind of doing it in pieces, and then I can feel some tackiness there, so I know that part hasn't been done yet. That part has been done, I should say. Get this down. All right, so now just want to make sure, trying to get this to be in a relatively straight line. So move this to the side. Making sure that edge is nice up there, and then this edge here. I'm mostly looking again at the stars versus the edge of the fabric, okay? Same thing when we were cutting those other pieces before. I was measuring from the stars versus measuring from the navy and white edging. Because I just sprayed on this side a few times, I've been eyeing where this fabric's going back over. So like this part, I just turned it around, is not sticky, so I can spray here because it's not dried. Remember I said between the stitching of the layers, it dries pretty well, but because I've been spraying and spraying and spraying, that piece did have some stickiness to it. So just want to make sure there. So as I'm looking at the backing, just going to pull this a little bit into place. All right, there we go. I think that's good. Now I'm going to just, and remember these fold lines and things, those will work themselves out when it's washed I can even spray this later and that'll get nicely worked out. So I'm not worried about those fold lines for now. I know that those won't stay in there forever. What I don't want is any bunching lines. Okay. That's that. Okay. All right. So now all that's done. I can put these to the side. Sorry for that noise. And now we need to do, that's all in place. Now we're going to sew a strip down here. So now this strip, the long strips that we have, need to be attached on this end here. Sorry, this part here is lifting up a little bit. So let me just pat that into place. It's still, the Odif isn't quite dry yet. So ideally I would leave this to dry for a few minutes, but I want to just move on to that next step. So it dries very quickly in my opinion. But I don't want that shifting on me when I go to do this next step. Okay, so now we're going to take our next strip and we're going to attach it right to this edge here. Let me find what I did with my, oh, here they are. My white strips, these are my white long strips. So these aren't the 33 inchers, these are the long ones. They're the whole width. And we're going to pin these down and we're going to stitch that direction. Okay. So now let me find where my marking is for which way is up. So this is an arrow going down. So I want this end to be down here and this end to be here. Now this is where things get tricky because you guys can't see this, but this is big enough that it's going off my table. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bunch this end a little bit so it's on the table so it's not pulling off. But I'm only going to pin to about here and then I'm going to shift it over and then pin the rest of the way. So there's no weight that's pulling this strip the wrong direction, okay? So I'm going to pin with all the weight on the table. In fact, this part still needs to be lifted up a little bit. We're going to be sewing from that direction down. So my pins to point back that way. And I'm going to grab my other pins so that we can, so I know I'm going to need more than just what's in here. And then I'm just going to start pinning. So again, we usually do pin one end, and then pin in the middle. I am going to, without stretching anything, pin here. I'm going to pretend this is my end. This is really probably my middle, and then that would be an end. But I can still use the same technique. We're going to sew it all in one length, but I'm pinning it in two different lengths. So if you have a smaller table, I have a pretty big table here. It's more than 60 inches, probably about 64 inches wide. But I have all the camera equipment and stuff up here, so I can't get all the way quite to my edges. So technically, I could fit this whole width on my table. But for today's purposes, I can't. But you may not be able to. So it's kind of good for you to be able to see what you could do to fix that. I'm not letting the whole thing hang over the edge and pinning it, because then if I pinned and this was being pulled, this backing, when I come and put it neutral, the pins are going to be securing in a way that is pulling the fabric because it was already being pulled, if that makes sense. So it really does matter that everything is flat and you're using gravity to your advantage when you're pinning. Otherwise, if that gravity is pulling things off the edge there, that can become a big problem. Just get all this pinned. I want this first one really well pinned because we're going to be dealing with that seam in the middle there too. So I don't want anything shifting. I am going to double pin this section too, just so all this section is done for when I go to pin that next section. I hope you guys have fun 4th of July plans for this year. I don't know if any place local to you is doing any fun 250th anniversary things. I am near DC, but I'm not going to be here for 4th of July. We're actually traveling up to Michigan for 4th of July this year. So we will not be in the DC area for 4th of July. But normally we are. Like I said, my 15-year-old will be excited to have this to bring with her in the car. Okay, so I'm going to now shift this carefully to where you can see it. So it's nothing's hanging off the edge. This is bunched right here, but I'm going to make sure that the section that I'm pinning right now is not being pulled by any of this. Does that make sense? And this is nice and straight here. Now these strips are long, so it does go off the edge a little bit there. You can't really quite see that, but they're meant to be longer and just to be able to be trimmed up later. So I am just going to pin this in the spot. Remember, this red stripe over here has been spray basted with 505. So it does have 505 in it, holding it into place. But now these pins will just get everything nicely locked in. So we're still doing the pinning in the middle, all those kind of things, but it just shifted over with how I had to pin on this particular table with this particular one. Okay. It's pinned up, so just wanted to show you this stripe so that you can see how these longer ones go. Because remember, we were doing these shorter ones before, and now we're doing the full length. So I do need my box of pins, which I was pretty sure I was going to need. Okay. Now I'll just finish up double pinning, and then we'll get over to the sewing machine. Okay. Almost there. Okay. Again, the pinning is not my favorite part, but it makes a difference. Especially this seam is much longer, so there's a lot more weight on it. So having it really, really well pinned in place is going to be much better for us. Okay, so let's go over to the sewing machine. One thing I haven't said is to like and share. I'm sure Kristen was good enough to put it up on the screen for us earlier, but like and share this post. There's still time to win. I think we're giving away one of these kits today. It may be a kit of choice, but I think it's the Let Freedom Ring kit itself. If I'm wrong about the Let Freedom Ring kit, please correct me, either Kristen or Sheila, but I believe that's what we're giving away today. So we'll give away 3 of those. So whether you shared it ahead of time or you're sharing it today, that's an exciting prize to win. So everything is up here on the table still, okay? And I'm just trying to go slow and have that weight off of the plate here. We want it up and airy, okay? I always say up and airy. Just don't want anything dragging, anything pulling. Want to make sure no layers are caught underneath. That's just going straight through to the backing and not catching anything else. We don't want to have to unpick anything. These thicker luxe cuddles can be a pain to have to unpick. So we want to make sure I just try to take my time and that none of the layers are catching underneath. So you'll see me fluffing all the time doing this stuff. Okay. I stand to sew most of the time. I don't know if you guys stand or sit, but I have this really nice adjustable table here that I can have up and down. It's nice to go from the cutting table where I'm standing over to here where I'm standing, so I'm not up and down, up and down, up and down in the chair. I do have a chair. I mean, you guys have seen me for Cuddle Conversations. I sit in a chair, and I do have a chair. Sometimes if I know I'm going to get all my cutting done and I don't have a ton of big pinning to do, like with the Cuddle, constantly having to get up and pin and pin and pin, I like to stand, but sometimes I do sit, but I like to stand when I can. But my foot pedal doesn't, it sounds clunky when I'm standing. I have to like clomp on it almost to get it to go. Like, it just sounds funnier than, it's not as gentle as when I'm sitting and just kind of put my foot there. Here I have to kind of like clomp on it. I always feel funny doing it. All right, we're almost to the end here. And then we'll see what this looks like. Right. Okay. Go. I didn't really need to backstitch there. I just get so used to doing that. Yeah, that's the end there, so I didn't really need to. Let me just take these out all the way across and then trim those threads, and we'll see what the situation is. Okay. Take all those second row of pins out. Okay. And then clip this thread. All right, let's go see. It's really starting to feel like a throw. It's getting some heft to it, which is exciting. All right. So now we've got our flag positioned in there. Then this stripe going down all the way across. It looks nice. So then what we would do is we would spray base this down and then do the next red stripe. This is the same way we did all these. We would just continue down the quilt. We're not going to do all that today because all of you people that have been so patiently watching, it's really a lot of the same. We're just going to keep doing the same thing and the same thing and the same thing. What I want to show you is just a little bit of how we can true things up in the end, and then a quick word on the binding. Okay, so as of this point, the top edge here and this whole section here is all done. Okay, because we stitched it in place. I could have stitched more in here. I'm not going to. You don't really have to. It's spray basted in place. But as far as the quilt is concerned, this quadrant, like these two quadrants, this whole part here is done. So I'm going to show you how we can true things up. Okay, it's not going to be perfect truing because the whole thing isn't done, but I'll just show you how I handle doing that. So you can see the backing here, that backing was relatively straight to begin with. And then other than this little bit that overhangs here, the rest all met pretty exactly there. So I'm not super worried about truing this up here, but there's some extra, trying to show it against the navy because it's more obvious. There's some extra parts here that certainly could be cleaned up and trimmed off. So, and I am not someone who's concerned with this turning out exactly 60 by 40 or whatever size it's supposed to be in the end. I more prefer mine to look nice and square in the end. So this is how I'll do that. I have my square ruler. I'm going to bring it close to me down here on this edge. I am not going to bother trimming any of this part here up because we have a 1/2 inch seam allowance with our binding. And so that's going to eat up any of that little extra of the navy there. But what I want to do is just get these pretty straight here. So I'm going to go from, I use the stripes in the actual strip quilt to kind of help with how everything's lining up, because again, that's where your eyeballs are going to go versus really on the edge. So the same thing I was doing with the stars, lining the stars up versus lining that edge up. Here I'm lining the stripes up versus lining the edge up. So I'm just going to try to get this lined up nice, and then I'm going to use my rotary cutter and just trim this edge. I'm not going all the way down because again, I have to do the rest of the flag that direction. But for this direction, I can just cut through all of this. My blade is not super sharp, so I do need to replace that. So that little bit there is trimmed off. And I really, maybe I will just trim this little bit off. Just do this all the way down here too, just to get that nice and trued. So I will do just all the way across. Again, I'm trying to make sure the lines of the striping are pretty good. And again, when you can see here that this is already like fluffing up. So finding the stripes exact isn't a perfect thing either, but just trying to get it cleaned up a little bit. Grab my vacuum and just clean that up, and then we'll move on to that other corner. I'll show you. Wonderful thing about Cuddle is that it is just so forgiving with all the fluffing up that happens. This doesn't have to be as perfect as if it was Cottons. If it was Cottons, I'd be sitting there truing that up for the rest of my life. But with Cuddle, I know it's going to fluff up and look beautiful. So the key is you want these stars to, you know, be nice straight lines, and we want your eyes from far away for it to look nice and be where you want it. So I'm just cleaning this part up here, and then I'm just going to see where from the backing. Yep. Okay. Trim that up. So we're going to do just about there. That overhangs just a little bit. So now I'm just going to do. So if you remember with the stars, when we trimmed up that panel, we trimmed the stars to, on the top and bottom edges, from this point out, it was 1.25 inches. So now I'm going to trim that down to 1 inch going across, and it's just going to make it so that we match up that top and bottom nicely. It's barely cutting anything off, just cutting not even quite 1/4. Just getting it cut off. Just do that over to that edge. All right, now I'm going to vacuum that little bit up, and then we'll show you how I'm going to handle that corner there. I'm vacuuming that edge a little more aggressively because when I put the binding on, whatever, all that fluff will be caught inside there because I'm not washing it in between now and then. Doesn't matter. No, I mean, it would just be inside the binding and nobody cares, but I just like to get all that fluff out of the way. Okay, so now I'll pull this up just a little bit. So again, my eyes are going to be more concerned with the stars and their positioning than it will be with the rest of this. I am not going to cut this edge yet because this down here only has one of these and it's not even spray basted into place. So I want to wait till I get the rest of my stripes down this way to do this edge, but I'm going to show you how I would do it. So this is the edge of the fabric, and here it's hitting right about where the navy is, and here it's going off a little bit. So again, I would line up the stars we did from the middle over about 2 1/4, I think is what we did, 2 1/4-ish. So I would probably lop all of that off there. So just all the way down there. And then it kind of gets us back to, you can't really see that down here, back to this edge. But again, I would wait and do the rest of the bottom half of this before I'm going to do this part now. So for now, we've cleaned up the top and that one corner is nicely trued. So we can move on to looking at the bindings and what we're going to do with the bindings. Okay, so let's see here. Put this to the side for a minute. So now we've got our bindings. This is the binding that I marked everything out on. And this one, I already pre-cut with my knife, that edge. So remember with the other one, I had a line here and they were shifted slightly. So the 5th line was here. So I was going to cut 5 lines. With this one, there were a couple little spots I straightened out with the knife. So I'm not actually cutting 5 strips. Well, I am cutting 5 strips, but this is the first strip. I'm just going to cut one of these out for you guys and show you how we put it on. So I'm not going to cut them all out, but we cut it out just the same way we cut the other strips. Just try to follow your line pretty well. We're not shoving and cutting as hard as we can. This one's pretty sharp, so I'm cutting off more nap than I would like to be cutting, but I'm also trying not to take forever for this, so I want to keep you guys moving. So not being as careful as I might be. But it does do a lot less damage than a rotary cutter would. A rotary cutter would be cutting off all that nap, so we wouldn't have any nice overhang to it. Right, almost there. The edges were the... Okay, so one strip is cut off, and then again, I would cut all of that, and I would have cut it ahead of time, and not just cut it now. I would have cut it before we even started sewing. All right, so I have these nap pointing down markings on all these strips. That's going to help us put them together later. So let me just vacuum this up and we'll talk about it. Okay, so here we go. We've got our strip that we cut, and then I've got that arrow on there pointing down. So if I was combining a whole bunch of bindings, we know the arrow would be pointing down here. So you would take your next strip, arrow pointing down, pretend that's just one strip, and you know you'd want these to be sewn together in a strip this way. Again, with hide, the nap kind of goes all over the place, so it's not quite as important. But with other cuddles, like with the C3 or even with other luxe cuddles, if there's a specific nap direction, it would look strange if you put them opposite directions. So when we put our naps together, when we sew our strips together, again, I'm just going to pretend these two ends of the same one are 2 strips. You would make sure the naps were going the same way. And then just like you would with cotton, you would put them together like that. All of these instructions are in the pattern, and you would stitch across at a diagonal like this. So there would be a nice bias binding put together. Okay, I'm just going to use this one strip right now just to show how we're going to put the binding on this quilt. But you make these little binding strips. You would sew all these together and make one long binding. Again, if you check out the Cuddle Studio, it's a playlist on Shannon Fabrics YouTube page. I know that I have a whole video in there that talks all about how you can bind with Cuddle. So, but I do want to walk you through a little bit of the step here. Okay, so we've got our binding. With Cuddle, I like to sew it to the back first and then turn it to the front. So let's do that. I'm just going to do this one corner here because, again, the rest of it is not quite ready for us, but this part is. So we've got our backing facing up. Okay, this corner is nicely done, so we're just going to pretend the whole thing's done. You're going to leave, I don't know, like a arm length, 10 inches or so. That's to match up your binding at the end, okay? What I'm going to sew here today, I'm still going to leave a bunch left over so I can join binding to this later and actually finish this. My daughter would not be happy with me if I didn't actually finish it, so I promise it's going to actually get finished. So what I do for this is I will put a pin in here. You could also use clips. Excuse me. Let me see my markings. So that is... I'm just making sure I have this the right way. Right, this is actually the opposite way. So when I have my bindings, remember I marked the binding going down. So this is the top edge. If I flip this, this is marked going down, so that's going down. When I flip it over, I want it going down. Again, with hide, does it really matter? No. And does it mean that on the other edges, it's not going to be the right way around because it's just one long piece? Yes. But at the top edge, which is the edge most of us kind of have pulled up by, our heads as we're using it, I like that one to have the binding nap going the right direction. So I'm starting at the other side. I still leave all this extra length. Okay, so the extra length is there. I'm going to pin this in place here. Again, you can use clips. I have some of those bigger clips. For this, I often do clip because I'm not super concerned with it being perfectly in place. And then we're going to go around the corner. I'll show you with the machine what I do. The binding is very forgiving, so I do not use more pins and clips than I really feel I need. And then in the videos that you see out on YouTube, we do tell you can do a lot more pinning. It's just depending on your comfort level. So it's really up to you. I'm not double pinning this or anything like that. Just kind of pinning that first one in place so I know where I want to get started. Still using my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I've got my binding here. This is the backing. Everything is up on the table. Okay. Again, the backing is facing up, which is a little unusual. That's not normally what we do. I do backstitch there just because again, this piece is going to be sitting on here while I finish the rest of this quilt. So I just really want to make sure it's securely in place. And now I'm just going to stitch. Okay. Undo that clip. And then I'm just going to hold the binding and use the stiletto. I'm not pulling and stretching the binding. However, this was cut with the width, so there is stretch in there. It's why we don't bother doing a bias binding, because there's stretch baked into it by cutting it across the width of the fabric. So I'm not as worried about that. As you get to the corner, we're going to want, get a little bit closer and I'll show you. We're going to want our nice little miters at the corner. So what I do is this, is I'm going to put a pin right in the corner and then point it up. And I also kind of use the stiletto to figure out where that corner is, so I know where to stop. So I need to take the pin out, but I can still see where I need to stop. And then you can either go to the corner this way, or you can go off the corner. It really depends on how you've learned to do your quilts. Either way works just fine. I'm going to clip these initial threads too. And then as we go around to the next side, this is what we'll do. Can you see down the table? Let's see if I can show you how show it flat. Now the strip gets pulled back on the miter, so that's pulled back like that. It's hard to see with this color, I think. You can kind of put your stiletto in there and pull it down. So now that fold, that miter and fold and stuff is in there. So I'm going to pin this down. I'm just pinning it in place for a second so everything stays. I don't want the fold of that miter to get off in there. So that diagonal fold under there, I want to stay in place for a minute. And then I'm just going to put a clip here so that that part's in place. And then this, it's not quite as neat as I would like it. You can just see it's not. So folding it back, folding it down. All right, there we go.
Ajaire, Sandy Schultz is asking if the Napa binding, is it matching the front or the back of your quilt? Or do you have a preference?
I have it, I'm having it so that it matches when it comes around to the top front, it's going down with the top front. As it circles the quilt, it won't match up every direction, but I just make it match that way. Does that make any sense? Probably not. I have no idea if that matters at all, because really as you go around the quilt, it kind of turns direction. But I like my binding as it flips over to the front to be going down like with the rest of the front of my quilt. So I am going to take this pin out here. That was just to kind of keep everything in place until I get it under. And then I'm going to start my stitching. Pull this thread and I'll do a back stitch. I was trying to do a back stitch before I pulled it. Forgot what machine I was at. This machine makes me do it that way. Okay, so again, I'm not having the binding off the table either, because when I do that, see how it curls? It's wanting to pull. Even that little weight, it's so lightweight, it's just a little skinny binding, it still wants to pull. All right, so I'm just going to do a little bit more here, because I want to leave enough end here that I can join up more binding to it in the future. So I'm just going to do that enough that you can see what the corner looks like, and then I will back stitch here just so I have this on there securely. Now let's take it back over and we'll look and see what the front looks like. And I can show you more exactly what I did with that, with the nap. Okay, so let's pull up here. Okay, guys, we're almost done. Just wanted to get you to see all these little parts here. Okay, so we stitched we stitched this down onto the backing. We ran around this corner here. So now this is the top edge of the quilt. Remember the stars are over there. This is the top right corner of the flag. So I'm going to take this binding, and this would all be stitched down there. It's not, but just this corner is. Now I'm turning this just down to there. I'm not double turning this. I'm not turning this under and under. You just turn there and see all that nap that would hang over. So all you're doing is you would take it over. And for this, I usually just clip this into place. I don't bother with a whole bunch of pins or anything. When you come to the corner, it naturally just folds over so nicely because of the way we did that corner. But even if it didn't, it's so fluffy, nobody's going to see your corners and it's going to look perfect anyway. And then all of that would fold over as well. So again, you would clip it down. To tack this down, I would use, on my machine, I would use a zigzag with probably 3 millimeters wide and 3.5 or 4 millimeter long. The reason I do a zigzag is because you want to make sure you're catching the backing here when you're going down here. And with all that fluff hanging off the edge, which is what you want, because you want it to cover your stitching, it's hard to see exactly where that backing is as you're stitching. So the zigzag just ensures that you catch it easily. When you get to the corner, you could do a straight stitch out to the corner if you wanted to. Mostly with the Luxe Cuddle, you can't even see that it's there. So I don't really bother most of the time. And then you would just continue zigzagging down here. And I really just kind of pull it up as I go. I don't do a ton of pinning with or clipping with this. But again, you can go out and check out the videos on how to bind with Cuddle. There's a whole bunch of them out there that can walk you through, just step by step the whole way through. Hold your hand. And I know for sure I did one, but I know there's others from the other Cuddle ambassadors as well. So that binding would just go all the way around and you'd get your gorgeous throw. I do have a couple pictures of like some stylized pictures. I know I showed you the kit picture earlier, but I just want to show you the stylized pictures because this is just so beautiful. Oh, here's one here. I mean, just look at how, I just love that so much. I mean, I think on this cattle fence here, you can't even see how big this thing is. I mean, it is big, but yeah, look at it just draping over that rocking chair on the porch. I mean, it's a nice big throw. And I'm just hoping you guys get your hands on it because I can't wait to see what you guys make with it. So that's what we're going to finish with today. Okay, so you saw all the little pieces of how you'd put together this flag strip quilt on your regular sewing machine. If you have more questions, feel free to ask them in the comments because I can always come back and answer questions later. We are going to have Christina, one of our other ambassadors, come in a couple of weeks. I know we've talked about it before, but she's going to show us how she does this on the long arm, which is going to be really exciting. And yet we have our winners. So far we have Lynn Gotch Brace, Janet Anna Nickel at Auden. Yeah, all you're going to have to do is email info@shannonfabrics.com. We need your name, shipping info, phone, and just in the subject line, put live stream winner. And like I said, I believe you're winning this Let Freedom Ring kit yourself. And they'll correct me if it's a different prize, but either way, you're going to go home some real nice cuddles. So I'm excited for you guys to start sewing these up. I know in my first picture, that little image said coming soon, but it's here. It's out in stores. You can get this kit. It's really exciting. I did want to also show really quickly, there is this pattern as well. This is a free pattern on the Shannon Fabrics website. It's just called the Cuddle Flag Quilt. This one has applique stars. So it's just got 5 little applique stars on there. Actually, I may have more. No, I guess it is just 5. And then it doesn't have all 13 stripes, just has a few stripes. So this is more of like, flag-ish, like I was talking about earlier. So it's not exact, but it's another strip quilt that you can make. If you don't have this kit, but you have similar fabrics, you can certainly make it up using this pattern. This is out on the Shannon Fabrics website, and it even has like the star and everything, but it's put together in much the same way that we put this one together. I just love that this one has the really pretty star panel. I think it's so special that it's the 50 stars and all 13 stripes. So thank you all for sticking with us today. I know this is a little bit longer than some of our lives go, but not as long as my bag one went a couple months ago, which we had to separate into 2 posts. So hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope this helps ease your mind about putting together some of the strip quilts that we have with Shannon Fabrics. And I'm excited to have you guys tune in next week. I think we're going to be doing Cuddle Showcase next week. So that's always super fun and inspiring. So we'll see you next Tuesday. Happy sewing, guys.